Alrighty, welcome back to Art for O.U.R. I've been thinking about this project for a while in the back of my brain. Ever since I was a kid, I loved camping. Absolutely loved it. Camping, campfires, sleeping outside in the tent, seeing the wilderness. That's been it for me. I've been lucky enough to grow up in the Rocky Mountains, specifically the Wasatch Range, but I've loved getting out in the Uintas, the Wind Rivers, Yellowstone area, Tetons. I just love it. I don't know what it is about camping, being outdoors, but there's been a few studies that have come around the medical community that have shown that if you are in nature a little bit every day, it improves blood pressure, mental health, heart function, you name it. Which sounds wacky for sure, but it's legit. There's something about our human side that loves being in nature, and our bodies recognize it, and we do well. So anyway, my favorite part of camping is the campfire. There's something very meditative and soothing about sitting around watching a few logs burn. The idea here is to create a campfire, maybe not at its peak, its hottest moment, but that last bit, when the last bit of wood's burning and there's just a few embers and a couple of flames whip up randomly once in a while. So I used a whole bunch of super glue to glue these pieces of half-burned wood into place the best I could. For this one I needed a real mold, not my typical attempt, but this took some doing to find a pot that would be about the right size and shape. And then the center was just another small cheap pot I had laying around with a filler of sand in the middle. This is to prevent waste of resin. Fathom resin by Total Boat is my go-to deep pour. It can handle up to 4 inches if you keep your studio area cool enough. Usually I'm doing the whole pressure pot vacuum chamber thing, and this is a different approach, and you got to be able to get to it right before the resin hardens to be able to do what I'm trying to do, which is to suspend different colors of resin in the resin right before it hardens. So with this approach, it's all about timing, and you have to know your resin really well to figure this one out, or be able to check on it all the time. So I poured in the resin, got everything the way I wanted it, and normally I'd stick it in a vacuum chamber for an hour and then pop it in a pressure pot for the duration, but that would ruin the effect here. And I didn't want it bubbling everywhere, which was a problem. So I accepted there would be some bubbles in this, and since it's a chaotic piece, wood burning, I was totally fine with something weird happening there, and thankfully the bubbles weren't too big of an issue. So the idea here is to wait till the resin gets sludgy, just like really thick honey, and the reason for that is you've got to be able to have it thick enough that the color you're putting in there won't dissipate and just kind of soak and dissipate into the clear resin. So I got these 10-inch 14 gauge syringes, which if you're in the medical community, 14 gauge needle is massive. Usually the biggest I ever use is an 18 gauge, and the way gauges work in medicine, for needles anyway, is the needle itself gets smaller the bigger the number it goes. It's kind of counter to what you would think. So anyway, 14 gauge is beyond anything you'd shove in a human unless you're trying to get like a bone biopsy or something. I thought it would be plenty big enough to be able to squirt it out the end, but I did not remember my lessons learned in physics. Mr. Bernoulli would have been just upset with me for getting that thick fluids being pushed through a very small diameter vessel are going to have a ton of viscosity, and I almost couldn't squeeze it out of here. I got the biggest workout squirting just probably a tablespoon of resin through there. I mean, it was bad. I broke a couple of them. Had to get some gloves on because it was just beyond. But it worked out reasonably well. Now, obviously, I could improve on the flame appearance. It didn't turn out as well as I'd hoped with that, but not a bad starting point. Um, but it worked out well in terms of the thickness. So with this Total Boat Fathom resin, at a room temperature somewhere between 70 and 72 degrees Fahrenheit, at about the 16-hour mark after pouring it, it was ready to go. Super thick, but not so thick that I couldn't get the needle in there, but thick enough that where I left the resin it stayed put, and that part worked out great. So I was pretty happy with that. I did end up, as soon as I had it how I wanted, putting it in a pressure pot because I didn't want to let the bubbles go willy-nilly. The one problem with this whole concept is that the resin is really thick when you're putting it in there, when you're injecting the new resin. And so you're going to introduce bubbles as it goes in. So there's this balance between, you don't want a needle that's too big because it really disrupts the resin and puts a whole bunch of bubbles in there, and you can kind of see that, versus being able to do anything at all. So this is one of those that gave me a little anxiety because you gotta get it just right. It's definitely a balancing act. You see the helping hands here? This is my nephew Hiram. A few years ago, he said to me, he was living with us for a little while, doing a service mission for his church, and during that time, he had some downtime in the evenings, and he said, "Hey, I got some money left over from something. Do you want to buy a lathe?" And you would never have heard of me or seen any of my projects if it wasn't for that question. I don't know what I've contributed to the lathing resin pouring community, but I was going down a different road artistically until this guy showed up. So, anyway, here's one hiccup. This aluminum flower pot, which I soaked in silicone mold release, which usually helps a lot. Usually, you put that silicone mold release in there, your project will pop right out. I could not get it to come out. I'm not really sure why. There was a little bit of a grit to it. You know, it wasn't the smoothest thing. I think the best molds, of course, are going to be super smooth. Maybe that was a problem, but after an amount of time, I'm not going to admit to how much of banging on this stupid pot. I finally just cut it off. I couldn't take it anymore, which is unfortunate because it was the perfect size. And it's, you know, once you find a metal form that works out great, you don't want to ruin it. But that was the one casualty for this project. This multi-rest by Carter is the bee's knees. I've had it a couple of projects now, and I cannot extol its virtues enough. They built this thing like a beast. Costs a bit, but for those of you who had suggested I get something to help steady my long pieces, which they tend to be, this has saved so much consternation. I can't even tell you. When you're pouring resin in a big project like this, it's inevitable that it's going to be off center, the weight. And boy, you get one catch, one mistake, your tenon bends, and it's off center, and you got to recut it, and it's an absolute nightmare. And in amount, and I should say in time saved, the multi-rest has been just absolute. I mean, if you're doing projects like I'm doing, I wish I had bought this a year or two ago once I was getting up to this size project. As they say, every woodshop person is one more tool away from greatness. I think I'm about there. I can't think of any more toys I want to buy, but this one was worth it. This was not a frivolous expense other than this entire pastime. But this one, if you're going to do wood turning in a big scale like this, I love it so much. Now, a couple of weird things with this project. Can't say I've ever worked with half-burned chunks of wood before. It's just not something that's come up. Um, the ash, the charcoal, charred parts of the wood are very fragile, as you probably would have guessed. So I knew as this was going to be an experiment, which is totally fine with me. Um, and for the most part, it worked out well. There was a couple of places where it was exposed as I was cutting through that it just kind of kept chipping away. So I ended up, you'll see me super glue a few things just because I didn't want to lose any deeper than I had to. And that was the only hiccup with the ash. I would have thought it would have been just a mess. My shop is now covered in what looks like a volcano explosion, and the whole place smelled like a campfire, but yeah. Okay, I gotta pause. Old friend of mine from med school who wanted to remain anonymous, we'll call him Dr. B, handmade that chess set and all those pieces. The board, all the pieces, every last bit of it. Even the horses were hand carved by him. He's because it's for charity. He didn't want to be named, so I'll honor that. But I knew he was a wood turner, kind of dabbling in things. I didn't know he was actually gonna do a project of that scale. But I'm telling you, it's fabulous, pretty awesome. So I wanted to put that in this video to highlight that. That'll be for sale for auction at the same time this piece is for auction. They'll be under the same link. You can go there and see them both going for the same amount. I'm sorry, the at the same time. All of the money raised, 100% of it, both these projects goes to Operation Underground Railroad. The money goes to helping fight child trafficking around the world. That's what we're doing at Art for O.U.R. If you're an artist or a collector, we've got everything from paintings to jewelry to resin to woodworking. And lots of it, 100% of the profit goes to O.U.R. Sometimes it's a smaller percentage, but we totally understand that some artists need to recoup some of their costs and are not in a position where they can just donate all their time and money. But there is a percentage, at least 50% or higher, that goes to Operation Underground Railroad in any case. So come buy something or donate something and help us free kids from trafficking around the world. Our other awesome sponsor is TrueMe. It's a smart kid for phones. I can't talk. A smartphone for kids. My brother started this company and they are endeavoring to create a smartphone that kids can use that they'll not have too much access to the internet, Facebook, and all these different things, and yet have some access. And then as the kid grows and you trust it more and more, you can cut them loose to just a full-fledged smartphone. So it's a great way to go to introduce your kid to using smart devices and not being taken advantage of by evil adults out there, which unfortunately happens all the time. I'm getting more gadgets. Um, Gotta say, part of me loves this. So this is my simple hollowing system. I've got two bits that go in there, a carbide cutter that really gets rid of high volume, and then I've got a negative rake carbide cutter that helps get it to the point where I could ready for sanding. Um, Between the multi-rest and this hollowing system, um, a lot of the pain in dealing with certain aspects of wood turning has been really, really helped out. For me, sanding, I usually go from about 40 grit. I use these orbital round sanding discs because I can use them on my hand sander, which I use from time to time, and it fits in the palm of my hand nicely. So I go from 40 grit up to, I want to say, let's see here, about 800, and then I go back down to 600 and start with the wet sanding. These foam squares are fabulous, and work my way back up to maybe 2000. Then I see where I'm at there. That usually gets me almost a perfectly clear finish. And then I finish them in teak oil, and I love that. It helps soak into the wood and protect the wood from cracking and aging too fast. And then there's something about the teak oil that if there are any defects in the clear resin, it really helps give it almost a perfect translucent look. The deeper and bigger the pot, the harder it is to finish deep inside there. So there's always some little defects, but getting down to it, getting to a place where this is almost perfect. My only criticism on this project would be the resin I injected in there could have been a little thinner. You know, when you look at flames, they're a little more translucent. But other than that, I actually like how this one turned out. So this is a new toy for me. This is a chuck made by Ron Brown. It's Ron Brown's Longworth chuck. I'll put a link in my description. I pretty much maxed out how much that chuck could handle with this project. And I don't mean the weight. It is very sturdy. It held up. And this is a heavy vase. I left the wall super thick so you could get the idea of the feel of the campfire. But I want to say this thing's 15, 20 pounds. I'll say 15 maybe. I have to weigh it. But the width of the top of the vase was a bit much for this chuck. Couldn't have got any bigger, wouldn't have handled it, but it was one of the bigger ones I could find for my entry level Longworth type chuck, and that worked out great. What it does is it helps hold onto the bowl so you can finish the bottom of it. Something I've been doing with just power tools and manually, and I decided it was time to get real. Anyway, thanks for joining me. It's always fun to share my projects with you guys. The auction for this will run for about 10 days, along with that awesome chess set that Dr. B donated. You never know who you're sitting next to med school might come back around in your life 10 years later. So thank you. It was good to catch up when he came and dropped that off. Anyway, see you on the next project. Thank you so much for your support, and have a lovely day.